Morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out in such great numbers. I'm sorry to say we seem to not be able to get the computer working, so we haven't had this issue before. Andy is doing this the old-fashioned way and writing out a few things that he would have had on slides, I think. So I apologize to everybody for the technical difficulties, but I'm sure that won't cramp your style too much, Andy. I'm very pleased to be able to have Andy Sancton with us here today for the second in our seminar series. Obviously, we've been through a pretty interesting local election cycle right now. And over the last 4 years, issues of open municipal meetings have come to the fore in a lot of places, not just here in London. And we've had an unusually activist provincial ombudsman, and these are all things that that Andy Sancton has weighed in on a number of times already, and that he's very seriously interested in, and he's begun writing about as well. And it's what he's going to talk to you about today. Most of you, I think, know Andy already, but in case you don't, he's a professor of political science here in our department. For many years, he headed up the local government program, and I think it's fair to say that he's certainly one of the most prolific and widely known experts on municipal government in Canada. So very pleased to have him with us today, and Andy, please take it away.
Thanks a lot, Martin. It is very gratifying to see so many people here today, so thanks everybody for coming. I would like to draw particular attention to somebody. I hope she's not embarrassed by this, but I think we owe a great debt of gratitude to everybody who offers themselves for election to municipal office. And I'm very pleased to see Marie Blosh, candidate from Ward 6, here today with her husband Sam Trussell. Congratulations, Marie, on a fine campaign.
Thank you very much.
I'm not particularly upset that I don't have these slides because I really made them up primarily for my own notes for myself. And if I'd had maps and diagrams and things, then I would be upset. But the only thing that I had on the slides was their actual notes, so that's why it's not a big deal. Now, many of you know that I have a draft paper on this subject that I decided to post on the Western Library website. I've never done that before. I've been quite gratified by the number of downloads. Every once in a while they report how many downloads there are, and it's past 150, I think, last time I looked. So this is the website for it. There's various other ways of finding the paper, I guess, but that's where it is. It's got a slightly different topic, slightly different title than the one for this presentation. And certainly, I'm looking forward to whatever comments you have today. But after you read the paper, if you do, welcome the comments as well. I have submitted it to publication. We'll see what happens. I decided that since a few of you might have read the paper, some of you perhaps under duress and of course under coercion, and of course I know there's a municipal law course that apparently I'm talking about having you read it. I decided that because some of you might have read it, I would sort of organize my approach to the topic differently today. So you're basically getting the same kind of information as in the paper, but organized in a different way. It is certainly true that my interest in this issue was sparked by conflicts in London about the Fontana 8 and meetings in restaurants and things like that. But apart from that one reference that I just made, this really has nothing to do with London city politics or what happened in London, although of course we could talk about that in the discussion if you want. So I decided to come at this in sort of 4 different topics for this presentation. And so I'll outline these now and then go through each one of them systematically, in order. The first one is kind of a political theory type of question, and I'm glad we have political theorists with us today. And that is, are open decisions better decisions? Do we somehow get better substantive decisions from open decisions, or is there something inherently better about the process of having open meetings. I don't have a whole lot to say about that, but I think it's an important question. The second subject is the experience in the United States with open meetings, their legislation, the sunshine legislation. And the third is, should municipal governments operate according to different standards of openness than other levels of government? In other words, is there something special about municipal government that requires more openness? And the final issue is, the final approach that I want to look at is a particularly aggressive approach on this issue of the Ontario Ombudsman. So the first subject here is, are open decisions better decisions? And I really tried to do some research on this and kind of look at, I figured people must have written a lot about this at some point or other, but I had great difficulty finding material on this issue. What came to mind for me, because I was aware of it, was President Woodrow Wilson's famous comments at the Paris Peace Conference. As a matter of fact, it was the first of the 14 points that in international diplomacy, open agreements must be openly arrived at. In other words, no more secret agreements. Everything needed to be done out in the open. And this provoked quite a lot of, has provoked a great deal of discussion since then. But I think it's fair to say that in the world of diplomacy, open decisions openly arrived at has not been the main way of doing business. I've had great difficulty, as I said, finding serious writing about the virtues of open decision making. Maybe here a slide might have been useful, because I do have a little reference to a particular book that I found. But it was written in 1964 by a guy called James Russell Wiggins, and it went into a revised edition in 1964. The book was Freedom or Secrecy, and he goes through different aspects of American government and how it's sort of bad when you have secrecy, and that freedom is expressed, that freedom is advanced by having more openness. Another thing that's come up in this discussion about open meetings, and it's so much of the literature, to the extent that there is a literature, is dominated by the American experience, but there's a certain defensiveness among many American authors, I think, that the American founding fathers met in secret. They deliberately met in secret because they didn't think they could come up with something if it was subject to completely open meetings at the time. And I didn't know this, but people had written that the Federalist Papers, which of course have been so important in so much of American political life, were apparently a public response to dissatisfaction resulting from the fact that the American founding fathers actually did meet in secret. So in a way, the sort of secret aspect of the founding fathers' meetings led to a good result in terms of the Federalist Papers. In terms of the sort of, there can be, you can say such a thing as political theory of open meetings, to the extent that there is anything, it seems to relate to the literature about participation, or what we in our department call civic engagement. But no, I'm just kidding. I mean, a lot of other people call it civic engagement as well. But participation in civic engagement, most of that literature seems to kind of assume that there's open meetings, that people can know what's going on and get involved by the actual reasons for having the open meetings in the first place. For example, there's no question that many participatory public forums could be held and are held to enable people to respond to proposals that are worked out in secret. And this is, I would suggest, actually the norm in democratic societies. Some group of people work out some kind of proposal out of the public eye and then present it for public discussion. And that seems to be the sort of model about most of the participatory literature seems to be talking about. Okay, the second issue that I want to, second way in which I want to come at this is the American experience with open meetings legislation. And I think that we can't make sense of what's been happening in Ontario around the open meetings issue and the Ombudsman and everything else without having some awareness of developments in the United States. And the only reason I knew this is because Jennifer Snell put me onto it. She came in later over there, so thanks, Jennifer. It is a morass of material you have to get into to try to figure out what's been going on in the United States on this. And I don't pretend to understand it at all, but I have been exposed to a whole new field of literature, mostly legal kind of literature, in trying to figure this out. In 1976, the US Congress approved, quote, an act to provide that meetings of government agencies shall be open to the public. This is the American Federal Sunshine Law. And that law basically does say that all agencies of the federal government, so this would be things like commissions that have members, they have to do all their business in public, unless there's an exception, and there's a whole range of exceptions. For example, the National Security Council does not have to do have all its meetings in public. But an organization like the Federal Trade Commission generally does have to have meetings in public, but again, subject to a bunch of exceptions. There seems to be quite a scholarship on what the effect of that law is. One of the effects has been to have fewer formal meetings of these commissions. Presumably, the implication is you can do business in private, and then you need fewer meetings in order to actually implement the decisions. Incidentally, there doesn't seem to be, at the federal level, this idea that federal trade commissioners can't talk to each other and work out arrangements before they have formal meetings. But I haven't gone into that in any depth at all. There are, of course, state laws, state sunshine laws, and now all states have sunshine laws in one way or another that apply to both state and local governments. And some of these laws, and this is very significant, I think, make it illegal for state party legislative caucuses to meet in secret. In other words, the idea of having a party caucus at the state legislative level that is closed to the press, closed to the public, is illegal. So they are serious about sunshine laws in some states, not all states. The exception on the generally on rules about this is that if the party is just talking about internal party business, they are allowed to meet without press being there. But if they're talking about public issues, which is what most party caucuses are doing when they're caucusing, they have to meet in public. Other state laws prevent virtually all forms of communication among municipal councillors except in open public meetings. And some of these laws are very serious in the sense that they're actually criminal, they form part of the state criminal law. And although I haven't found a case of people actually going to jail for talking about public issues in private, that possibility is there. And there have been references in literature that said from practicing lawyers saying that they counsel their clients not to talk. This is your clients being municipal elected officials. They counsel their clients not to talk about local government business with their colleagues in private unless they do want to go to jail. Not surprisingly, in a litigious society such as the United States, these laws have been challenged, most recently by Texas local elected officials. And Texas has some of the strongest rules about open meetings. The Texas local officials have challenged the constitutionality of such laws, claiming that they violate freedom of speech and freedom of association in the as defined in the U.S. Bill of Rights. Recently, the U.S. Fifth Court of Appeal has recently rejected this challenge. I think there's a possibility that it'll be sent to the Supreme Court of the U.S., but the Supreme Court of the U.S. will first have to decide whether they want to hear the case at all. The Fifth Court of Appeal rejected the constitutional challenge of the Texas local elected officials on the grounds that the restrictions were content neutral. Now, there might be people in this room that have more understanding, but this opens up a whole other range of jurisprudence that I don't claim to be an expert on at all. But as I understand it, the jurisprudence on this is that it is all right to restrict freedom of speech and freedom of assembly for a public purpose. In this case, the public purpose being open decision-making, allowing citizens to know what's going on. It's acceptable to do that if the provisions are content neutral, in that they don't prevent one kind of speech and allow another kind of speech. So the rules about not talking about things in private with your colleagues apply whether you're talking about social services or land use planning, or whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. They apply across the board to everybody who's in this position. Just as there would be as there are laws restricting what federal or state public servants can do in election campaigns and stuff. That's perfectly acceptable. It doesn't violate freedom of speech if you're restrictions on what public servants can do on that, because it applies to all public servants in an equal way, regardless of what position it might want to advance. So the Texas open meetings laws were ruled to be perfectly constitutional. Now, there is a bit of a backlash from this in the that I've discovered in some of the legal writing, and there's a lot of legal commentary on all this stuff. But there's a guy I've had a little bit of contact with because I discovered one of his articles. A person called Stephen J. Mulroy of the University of Memphis Law School. He recently wrote in an article that, quote, "There is little empirical evidence suggesting that the strictest provisions of strict open meeting laws are reasonably necessary to further the governmental interests recognized as supporting campaign finance disclosure laws." This is because campaign finance disclosure laws are caught up in the same legal questions. Anyway, for this reason, courts or legislatures should scale back the overbreadth of the strictest of the open meeting laws. Even the most well-intentioned reform can overshoot in their effort to bring sunshine to the local legislative process. Some state legislatures have cast too dark a shadow on the free speech rights of legislators and thus of the people they represent. So there's a bit of a debate going on in the U.S. around this, but there's no question that sunshine laws requiring openness are pretty clear in most states. So my third approach is kind of a question mark. Should there be special openness standards for Canadian municipalities? And I'm comparing Canadian municipalities here mainly to parliamentary systems, the federal and provincial governments. So it's pretty clear that there are two big differences between parliamentary systems and the way in which our municipal councils operate. First of all, there are no cabinets at the local level. In my paper, referred to there, I make reference to the fact that the cabinet in Canada and Britain is actually called the Privy Council. It's not called the Open Council, it's called the Privy Council. We don't have we don't have the equivalent of that at the local level. We also don't have party systems generally in Canadian municipal politics, except in British Columbia and Quebec. And of course, at the parliamentary level, cabinets and party caucuses meet in secret. And with some exceptions, from time to time, it's in the cabinet and in the party caucuses where political decisions are made. So if we're serious, I mean, if anybody were to be serious about having open decision-making at the federal or provincial levels, there would have to be some kind of requirement that caucuses and cabinets be open. The Ombudsman, in one of his journalistic efforts, has claimed that the legislature and the Parliament of Canada never closes down, never closes its doors, which is not entirely true, especially at the committee level. But he completely ignores the fact that cabinets and caucuses meet in secret. So my question in general for everybody, but especially for the Ombudsman, is there an argument for opening cabinets and caucuses? If we take seriously open decision making, why not open these things? Okay, the Ontario legislative provisions for open municipal meetings, and maybe it would have been useful to have a slide for this. The Municipal Act in Ontario defines a meeting as any, quote, regular, special, or other meeting of a council, of a local board, or of a committee of either of them. As the Ombudsman frequently points out, this is in a sense a circular definition. It says a meeting is a meeting is a meeting. But the real intent of the section is, I think, pretty clear. It's to say that the open meeting provisions are not just restricted to the municipal council itself. The open meeting provisions apply to committees of council and to other boards and commissions that are related to the council. The Act does allow for in-camera meetings for specified purposes, and I think there's a lot of agreement that these are, in general, good exceptions. Even the Ombudsman doesn't quarrel with most of them. The Parliament of Canada, the provincial legislatures don't deal with individuals. They don't deal on the floor with things like land purchases and stuff like that. Those are the sorts of things that municipal councils are allowed to discuss in private, that the open meeting rule doesn't apply. Not surprisingly, all of this kind of stuff in different provinces at different times has provoked court cases, including some famous one for the city of London, which I'm not going to talk about because I don't think it's directly relevant to what we're talking about here, even though the Ombudsman thinks it is. But we can talk about that later if you want. But the one that I'm most interested in is the 1991 decision called Southam Incorporated versus the Ottawa Council. Southam, of course, at the time was a major media company, and generally speaking, media outlets are the ones that are most interested in opening up these local meetings. They take this. If you're talking about interest group politics here, it's media that are want to open things up. Anyway, in this important decision, the Ontario Divisional Court ruled that meetings are deemed to have taken place, quote, if matters which would ordinarily form the basis of council's business are dealt with in such a way as to move them materially along the way in the overall spectrum of a council decision. So this materially along the way is an important judicial pronouncement about figuring out whether a meeting exists or not. The meeting in question here, and it's important, I think, to get this fact on the table, the meeting in question was a council retreat at a ski resort. So the idea was, remove the council from ordinary day-to-day business, get everybody together, talk about the big issues, the kinds of things that happen around here with our administrators, and it seemed to be a good thing to do, to get everybody together and do that kind of stuff. It is very significant, I think, that all of the councillors were invited to this retreat. I mean, after all, if you're going to have a retreat of a group, you got to have all the people there, and that the senior staff were there as well. So it was just like a municipal council meeting, except it was somewhere else, and the idea was to talk about bigger issues rather than the routine business of the municipal council. Now, I've always been interested in the issue of local political parties in municipal government. It's kind of been a debate about municipal government ever since I first started studying it. I've probably put it on a number of exams at various levels. You know, should we have municipal political parties? Give all the reasons for and against, that kind of stuff. So that means I've read probably thousands of answers around that question. So I kind of, you know, I know about this stuff. At least I know what the arguments are. I don't know what the answers are. There have been no court rulings that I've been able to find about whether, if there are political, municipal political parties, whether it's appropriate for their caucuses, or whether it's legal for their caucuses to meet in private or not. I hate to admit this, but I've tried to find out whether the municipal political parties that exist in British Columbia and Quebec actually have caucus meetings. I've gone through what people have written about these parties, haven't been able to figure out whether they have caucuses. I've written to Vision Vancouver, the person who's supposed to be in charge, the executive director of Vision Vancouver, didn't get any answer from the email. They are having a municipal election campaign there now, which might, but I don't know. So this is a pretty simple factual question that I'm trying to figure out the answer to, but right now I don't know whether these caucuses meet in private or not. That the so-called moderate group of the Toronto City Council met in a caucus-style meeting in 2012, and they claim to hold the balance of power, which I think would have been true in the circumstances. And it was on the front page of the Globe and Mail that they had this meeting, and it was actually referred to as the formal meeting of the moderate group. And I would have thought the whole idea would be to keep it informal, but anyway, they talked that it was a formal meeting, and they promised to meet again. Again, I don't know whether they met again, but it looks like nobody seemed particularly concerned about groups of Toronto City councillors meeting and talking about public business. On this issue, a municipal lawyer, the first municipal lawyer whose work I ever read, who was, I think he's still alive, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, Stanley M. McCooch, he has confirmed he is alive. That's good. I'm getting a little worried about this now because more people that I studied as a younger person, they're not around so much now. Anyway, Stanley McCooch was writing for a research report for the Royal Commission on Information that was going on then. It was headed by D. Carlton Williams, former president of Western. McCooch wrote this in his research study about municipal freedom of information and open meetings. Quote, private caucus meetings should also be permitted. He also referring to circumstances in which municipal councils should be able to meet in private. Some members of a municipal council may decide that they have a common political perspective and may wish to meet together to discuss positions they should take on particular issues and to formulate policy proposals and strategies for having these proposals passed. In effect, these groups are similar to political parties found at the federal and provincial levels of government and should be able to caucus in private under the open meeting provisions. It is necessary to be sure, however, that the term caucus is not used, as it is now by some local government bodies, as the equivalent of a meeting of the committee of the whole. Because what he's referring to here is that, particularly in rural areas and small towns, the council would get together, call themselves a caucus, decide everything that was going to be decided, and then come in and have the formal meeting. And McCooch didn't want that idea of what a caucus was to be mixed up with this idea. Okay, finally, taking up too much time here. The fourth issue is the aggressive approach of the Ontario Ombudsman. So the Ontario Ombudsman is the default closed meeting investigator for municipalities that do not appoint someone else to this function. So starting in 2006, because it looked very difficult for citizens, for anybody to challenge closed meetings, the law was amended to say that if citizens had complaints, they could appeal to a closed meeting investigator if a municipal council appointed such a person. If they didn't appoint such a person, the provincial ombudsman got to be the closed meeting investigator. It's important to note, as Jennifer Smout has reminded me, that more than once, that the ombudsman or a closed meeting investigator has no authority to overturn bylaws or to impose other forms of sanctions. This is important because what the ombudsman or a closed meeting investigator would be doing would have much more kind of legal clout if the person come along and say, look, you made this decision in secret, it's not valid. But that's exactly what the closed meeting investigator or the ombudsman cannot do. What the ombudsman, and I'm going to focus on the ombudsman here, not the closed meeting investigator, what the ombudsman can do is receive complaints from a citizen, write a big report saying that bad things have happened, hold a press conference, hurl abuse at the people who were involved in the bad things, and then go away. And that, of course, is exactly what the ombudsman has done on more than one occasion. So, ombudsman's rulings, even though they don't have legal significance, can be extremely politically significant. A lot of attention has been paid to how many incumbents were defeated in the London municipal election. I just checked out the Sudbury municipal election, and there were more incumbents defeated in the Sudbury municipal election, or didn't run, than there were in London. What's London and Sudbury got together? What got in common? What they have in common is that they were both the subject of abuse from the ombudsman, who said that they were both dysfunctional outfits. And that actually, the ombudsman actually argued for a wholesale clean-out of both the London and Sudbury councils, which is exactly what he got. This guy's a powerful guy. I know that the only factor at work here, but it was one factor at work. I'm not going to focus, as I said, on the Sudbury decision, on the London decisions, because the most important ombudsman decision came in 2008. It related to Sudbury, and the title of his report was "Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me," opening the door on the Elton John ticket scandal. If you didn't know about the Elton John ticket scandal, it's a very important issue in Sudbury. It's who got free tickets to an Elton John concert. What in effect the ombudsman ruled was that when a group of Sudbury councillors were sitting around in the lounge of the council meeting, the council, they were having a meeting, but because they weren't actually deciding on what to do about public business, instead they were deciding about what to do with their free tickets, he didn't think they'd done anything improper. He didn't think that, or he did think they'd done something a little bit improper, but he didn't violate the provisions of the open meetings rules. The reason this decision was so important is because it said that small groups of councillors meeting together can be a meeting. And it was in this report that he formulated his definition of what a meeting was. And he said that he did this after a thorough review and analysis of relevant case law in Ontario and other jurisdictions. And the other jurisdictions were clearly the United States because all the references of other cases came from the United States. That's why I've gotten involved in all these US jurisprudence. So the Ombudsman's definition of a meeting is that the members of a council or a committee must come together for the purposes of exercising the power or authority of the council or committee for the purpose of doing the groundwork necessary to exercise that power or authority. So the Ombudsman has made up basically his own definition of what a meeting is. It's different than the Ontario Municipal Act definition, and it's different from the Southern decision that I quoted earlier, which related to moving things along materially. Now, just to conclude, I think what the Ombudsman is doing here is raises a number of important questions that actually go significantly beyond just the study of municipal or local government. The first question is, where does the Ombudsman's authority come from to make up his own definition of a meeting that is different from that in the Municipal Act? A second question is, if councillors want to stay clear of the Ombudsman's condemnation, and I would certainly counsel them to do that given the apparent political significance of what he decides, how much can they talk to each other about municipal business. We've got a bunch of councillors all across Ontario, but certainly in London, who are going to be going through orientation sessions in the next few months. They're going to be basically told the rules of the game. I don't envy the municipal clerks or the people who work for municipal clerks or whoever's charged with doing this to explain to councillors exactly what they're allowed to talk with to their colleagues and under what circumstances. And you know, my temptation would be, I think, to take a position similar to some of the Texas lawyers that I was talking about earlier. If you want to be really clear about this, if you want to be really careful, don't talk to other people at all outside council meetings about council business. The Ombudsman's made it clear you can talk to other councillors about, you know, their kids and personal stuff like that. But once you start talking about municipal business, you are moving along the way to laying the groundwork necessary to for municipal decision making. So my final questions are we better off if we potentially know everything that councillors say to each other about council business? Does that lead to better decision making if the public knows about all this stuff? And finally, if the answer to that first question is yes, does the same logic apply to members of parliament, to members of the provincial parliament, both of whom operate within parliamentary systems? And you know, if somebody wants to make a distinction between those two levels, what is the distinction? Why do the arguments different at the two levels? And the subsidiary question that I don't have on my slide is, if the Ombudsman does think that we need as much openness at the federal and provincial levels as at the local level, why isn't he crusading for that? And he's certainly done a lot of crusading for things that aren't within his jurisdiction right now, so I don't see why he wouldn't do that. So I've challenged him sort of to do that, to come to grips with that issue, but there's been no response yet. Anyway, I'm stopping there.
Thank you. So we have 20 minutes or so for questions. So please, questions and comments.
So, in the recent London example, there was councillors who lawyered up because there was this understood threat of jail, and I never really did understand where their perception of that possible penalty came from. If you listen to that.
Jennifer might be able to help, but I think it was if you obstructed the Ombudsman's investigations, if you lied to the Ombudsman or something, you could end up, you could take action against you. Pardon?
If you don't cooperate.
You don't cooperate, yeah. Okay, so I mean, so that's where the potential threat came from. Presumably, if you were totally clear in your own mind that you were cooperating, you were being open, you were telling the Ombudsman what he wanted to know, you would have no need for legal advice. Yeah.
What was the practical outcome of the Southern case?
I don't think, by definitions, retreats don't make formal decisions. So there was no overturning of any formal decision. But the practical outcome was that municipal councils don't have retreats. There was later a provision added in the Ontario Municipal Act that councils are allowed to meet in camera and secret for educational purposes. And just to show that I'm open-minded on this, and even I know of a municipal council that has meetings in secret to receive briefings from their staff, and they claim that this is quite proper because it's education. So just about anything could be educational, right, under that guideline. I would say it's not educational if you're getting a briefing from a staff. But the idea is if you're, you know, some kind of I don't know why you want to have educational meetings in secret anyway. I'm in favor of open education. What's wrong with open education?
Yeah, so what was Sullivan looking for in the case? What did they want?
Southern wanted to be able to send a reporter to the retreat. Sorry, I missed your
And
basic
did the
one.
court rule that they could?
Basically, yes. This raises this. I'll try to just quick. It raises an interesting question, though. Let's say that a group of municipal councillors wanted to meet together to talk about something. Now, it doesn't. Nobody has suggested that that's an illegal thing to do in Ontario. What it is illegal to do would be to have the meeting without giving proper public notification and without going through the proper process. So again, I'm a lawyer as we got here, but I'm open to other suggestions. But say this group of councillors said, we want to discuss about these things. We don't want to do it in the council chamber, but we want to do everything properly. So I'm going to go off to the municipal clerk and say, we want to have a meeting to talk about things. Is the municipal clerk then obligated to say that these councillors are meeting in Joe Smith's basement on Saturday night, and this is the official legal notification that the meeting is happening, and then the press can come along and anybody else who wants to come? I don't know what the answer to that is. Just like I don't know whether you know, the real effect of the Southern decision was that if the municipal council had a retreat, it would be legal if press was allowed to come. Yeah, right.
Okay, I'm gonna wade into this a little bit. I'm thinking you get started with this question of are open decisions better decisions? I kind of think you kind of almost need to step back one more step and say, you know, why would we want to have open decision processes in the first place? Like, is there some kind of underlying justification? And there is. If we go to something like, you know, Bob Dahl's book, Democracy and Its Critics, where he argues that it's about, you know, mitigating power inequalities, right? If we want to have power coming from the people and, you know, sort of that connection, you maximize openness so that people don't go off, so the representatives don't go off and basically, you know, do the stuff you don't want them to do. And so it's about mitigating that power inequality. So I think there's a powerful justification for it. But then there's the countervailing thing as well, which is that if you go too far down the road of making everything open, you risk sort of stalling the ability of government to actually get anything much done. It becomes messier and messier and messier. And if we put those two things together, and I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on this. My own sense is that the argument for opening up meetings is stronger at the federal and provincial levels than it is at the local level. And the reason is that the partisan mechanisms for coalescing, you know, around positions exist federally and provincially. So there's a mechanism for getting things done. And so the argument for opening and transparency is actually stronger there because you can open, you can still get things done. Because, you know, at the end of the day, majority parties, you know, are going to make decisions. Whereas here, you know, at the municipal level, because we don't have parties, it's kind of, opening things up is kind of a double whammy in terms of actually being able to, you know, get the business of government done efficiently. So just
I'm not sure that I'm prepared to say that it's more important for the parliamentary mechanisms to be open. But I have tried to think about this. I mean, what I think does need to be open, and you know, I think I am an advocate of openness in many ways. What I do think needs to be open, the legislative process needs to be open. Now, what I'm talking about here is the formal debating part of it. There has to be a place where our elected representatives openly debate subjects one side, and you get different views expressed. And parliaments and our provincial legislatures are very good at that, but we shouldn't pretend that that's where the decisions are made. That is where the decisions are debated, and the issues get put out for discussion in a much more clear way. The reason we need open meeting provisions at the local level is to stop municipal councils from abdicating their responsibility to discuss bylaws and public issues in public. But I absolutely think that the political process cannot work if municipal councillors are prohibited from discussing things with each other before the legislative process happens. In the paper, I quote the mayor of Greater Sudbury, who didn't run in the last election, who took the Ombudsman's rulings in Sudbury very seriously. She said, because we're not allowed to talk about these things outside the meeting, I am not going to lobby for anything within my council. I'm just going to leave it aside and show up for the meetings. And I think that is just a complete application of a mayoral job. I've always thought the job of the mayor is to find out what the councillors are thinking, try to get some organization, try to get. If the mayor wants to push his or her agenda through the council, how are they going to do that without talking to the councillors in private? I mean, they can make speeches about it, but you got to talk to people and say, what's your problem with this part of my agenda? Or what do you want to do about that? Anyway, I'm sorry I rounded off, but that's what that's the opportunity to debate issues in public is what's important. Yeah, Charles.
I think I'm agreeing with you. I was going to say before that Martin's making me think about this consistency issue. I thought the thing with the different levels of government just seems to me the point is right, and unless there's some special reason, maybe yours is one of these things, that the same argument should apply to the different levels of government, in which case, yeah, should be like that. Federal should be. But my main question was going to be about, or point was going to be about the main issue, which is, the question is depends on what kind of meeting it is, right? I mean, that might be a way of putting your point. Like, there are lots of meetings that take place, but the ones that really matter that need to be open are the ones in which a decision is being made and people are providing their publicly available reasons, or reasons that ought to be publicly available, for why they're making that decision. That is a meeting where a vote is taking place.
I agree with that.
Needs to be public.
But I think we all know that in politics, if we can pinpoint the decision point of a particular issue, that the real decision point is often made before the formal vote happens.
Right. No, I'm agreeing.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, the sort of reductio ad absurdum of the whole thing is the American case where people say they can't talk about anything at all unless we're, or the mayor of Sudbury saying that they shouldn't be. That's crazy. I mean, it's obviously obvious. It shows how crazy the position is. And so if what follows from this is that people are too scared to debate things because they think something might be deemed a meeting and therefore somehow improper, then there's no public business will get done.
I agree with that. Yeah.
How do you maybe foresee this issue moving forward? Because from a general public point of view, there's a lot of support for the Ombudsman and his drive.
Huge support for the Ombudsman.
Absolutely. And his drive for what is generally a public good, which is openness of government. And so to get the nuance that you described here today into the public realm for discussion and understanding seems an impossible task. And so I wonder if you could speak to how you think this issue might be able to move forward with some of these corrective tweaks, let's say, understanding that basically you're standing up and saying we need less forgiveness.
Well, first of all, that's why we have Cambridge University professors. Sam's going to help you out on that.
Yeah, I think people need to step back from some of the characters and personalities that have been involved in this, and I think people just sort of need to look at the source of a lot of the confusion, and that is the very poor circular definition of meetings in the Act. So when you have a definition like that, and there's no clear indication, what do you really mean by that? The next question that you have to go through is, okay, who is the legislature given the authority to interpret this? And there could be some disagreements here, because again, the statute is not that clear about it, but I think the Ombudsman can make a good argument that their office has a certain amount of discretion. That, of course, could be abused, but they have a certain amount of discretion in making this determination. And I think that where you're starting to see some of these differences between what that office is saying and what the courts are saying is it's really not that clear what the definition of meetings is and who's supposed to interpret it. So I think,
No, you got it.
okay, so I think what has to happen is, if Parliament either has to say, we see what's going on and it's fine with us, we're not going to do anything about it, or they need to say, we're going to refine the definition of meetings. And we're going to, take a lot of input on what the definition of meetings should be, and it needs to be given some more clarity. I think this is particularly acute as we start to see people step into council positions who are very savvy in terms of new forms of communication. So, once we sort out like who's sitting where at Billy T's, it's going to get I said we shouldn't look at that. But we need to look. Is setting up a wiki and limiting the password to certain people? Is setting up a Google Docs site? I mean, is setting up a Facebook page? There are just all sorts of ways of using social media to engage in the kind of communicative activities that I think this act is supposed to be dealing with that people haven't even thought of yet. So I think it's very, very important for the legislature to think about whether they want to improve this definition a little bit.
I couldn't agree more that we need a better definition of a meeting. Exactly what that definition would look like, I'm not sure that I'd like to be the legislative drafts person trying to figure out how it would look exactly for the reasons that you said, because of all the different ways that you could imagine a kind of meeting could be conducted. But let me come at this in a negative kind of way. The legislature, Ontario legislature and legislative committees in public have discussed the question of what a meeting is. They haven't discussed it a whole lot, but they have discussed it. And I went through all the legislative debates about that. Nobody with any position, nobody arguing any position, the press people, activists, different political parties, nobody suggested that their intention with this definition was to prevent groups of councillors from talking to each other to lay the groundwork for the advancement of business. So this is solely a production of the Ombudsman. And I would have thought at a minimum, he should have taken guidance from the courts and used the same definition in the Southern case as rather than make up his own definition.
Maybe it's as simple as adding a sentence to the act saying nothing in this section shall be construed to prevent groups of non-quorum groups of people talking individually. And I think that way you're not even putting in an exception. But if that's what the intention is, that you can glean from the legislative history, there's enough confusion out there that maybe they should come back and say so explicitly.
That would be a good start. I would certainly grant you that. But as we know from the Billy T's case, there are even difficulties with that because say there were 3 or 4 of us who had held common views about it, or were concerned about a particular issue on the council, and we wanted to get together to talk about it beforehand. We were clearly not a quorum of the council. It's possible, though, that by accident we could be quorum of some other committee. And as soon as you get into that, then you've got a problem about whether unwittingly you're having a meeting of the Heritage Committee or something when you're talking about some issues. Yeah.
So in our system, Andy, if we have a troublesome sentence in legislation, we have 2 ways of sorting it out. We can either amend legislation to make it clear, as was suggested here, and yours suggested, or a court can say what it means. So my question to you is, can the Ombudsman be taken to court?
Jennifer's telling me no, and see, that's why it's difficult, because the Ombudsman hasn't done anything. The Ombudsman's only written a report. So there's the answer. The Ombudsman can't be taken to court.
He's the only one that can refer his interpretation. He's the only one that can refer his interpretations to a court. And why wouldn't he?
didn't even know you could do that, but Kate, you wanted to say something?
I was just gonna, when you're looking at other jurisdictions, people in the ombuds role, is there any obligation on those individuals in terms of maintaining some sense of political neutrality? Or even other positions that I appreciate you to be in, like an auditor, an independently appointed role, but they have some obligations in terms of conduct. Do we find examples of that in the previous position of the jurisdiction?
Well, first of all, the ombudsman doesn't figure in the U.S. cases at all. I mean, I don't know if there are any ombudsman people in the U.S. Are there? But anyway, they're not involved in this issue.
Not to my knowledge, I think there are more liberal standing roles under American jurisdiction where people get direct access to the courts themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. But so in terms of other ombuds people in Canada, the British Columbia ombudsperson has pronounced on this issue and has a much more, I would say, moderate and nuanced view of open meetings.
One more point, I think we got to
Okay, well, just to open up again, the whole question of the intentionality of the meeting. It occurred to me that you can think of closed meetings in a very positive way sometimes around democratic theory, pre-decisional meetings, deliberations, where you have a full and frank disclosure where people can maybe say things that they couldn't in another forum. We know from other levels of collegiality, this is deemed to be a good thing. And of course, on the other side, the word that I don't think you used today in the presentation, but occurs to me is the concept of conspiracy, and the negative side of deceit, trickery, limiting access, corruption, and so on. And so, I wonder what you thought about, in terms of formulating some rules around this. If it's at all possible to find language to try and convey those two sides of, if you like, the good and the bad side of how close meetings might take place.
That's it. Tough one. Basically, I don't think I could formulate those kinds of distinctions. I mean, there are. Let's be clear here. There are circumstances in which closed meetings would effectively be illegal, right? If a group of councillors got together and talked about conspiring to allow some developer to do something in return for some payoff for themselves, that would be violate the criminal code. So I mean, there are. I don't know if we can go much further than that. I really haven't given any thought, but the whole question of how you define what in advance what might be legal and what isn't legal, I do find very difficult. We need more clarity, but I'm not sure that we can lay it out perfectly. One more comment that I wanted to make that I didn't say before, very quickly, Martin. I have, I've put this paper out there. I've tweeted its existence. I've communicated with the Ombudsman about this. I, just from my limited experience on this, I would not want to be the person who took on the Ombudsman in an open forum. And I wouldn't mind doing it in a debate. I've actually asked him, I've challenged him to do a debate, if I'll debate you somewhere. But making the political case for non-openness is not a good spot to be in. And and just on the tweeting side, I've got abusive tweets from people, saying that language, the running dog of the Billy T's gang and all this kind of stuff. Well, there are people out there who think that the Ombudsman is definitely on their side. All the politicians are crooked. Ombudsman's got the answers, and I can understand why any government would want to be very, very careful about taking on the Ombudsman on this question.
Well, there would be a lot more to discuss, so you could all discuss in your own open meetings. So thank you very much, Andy, for a great presentation. Thanks everybody for coming and for a great discussion.